The Grand Chamber was the largest room in the known galaxy. It could hold 100,000 beings from 1,000 different worlds. Today, every seat was full. The air was thick with tension, and the lights were dim. Something important was about to happen. Ambassador Velric stood at the center of the chamber. His body was made of living crystal, and when he was nervous, his surface would crack and reform. Right now, small cracks were spreading across his chest. He held a document in his three-fingered hand. The document was old. Very old. But today, he had to read it again. Fellow members of the Galactic Council. Velric began. His voice was like breaking glass. I have called this emergency session because 3 of our member species have violated Directive 7742. They have done something forbidden. They have asked humans to fight in their wars. A wave of whispers moved through the chamber. Some delegates looked confused. Others looked afraid. A few of the younger ones laughed quietly. For those who do not know, Velric continued, Directive 7742 was created 300 years ago, shortly after we made first contact with the species called humans. The directive is simple. It says, under no circumstances shall any member species recruit, provoke, or involve humans in military conflicts. A young delegate from the Marathi Federation stood up. His name was Korvan, and his species looked like tall birds with blue feathers. He was only 50 years old, which was very young for a galactic diplomat. Ambassador Velric, Korvan said with a smile. I must ask why we are wasting time on this. I have studied humans. They are small. They are weak. They live for less than 100 years. Their planet is a dangerous place filled with poison and predators. Yet they have only basic space travel. Why should we fear them? Several other young delegates nodded in agreement. They had never seen humans in war. They only knew them as traders and travelers. Strange creatures who smiled too much and asked too many questions. Velric did not answer. Instead, he looked toward the elder section, where the oldest members of the council sat. These were beings who had lived for thousands of years. They had seen empires rise and fall. They remembered things that younger species had forgotten. One of the elders rose slowly from her seat. Her name was Thessa, and she was a keeper of memory. Her species lived for 5,000 years, and their purpose was to remember. Thessa was 3,000 years old. Her body was thin and gray, and her eyes were like deep pools of black water. The chamber fell silent when Thessa stood. Everyone knew that when a keeper of memory spoke, you listened. Young Korvan, Thessa said. Her voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the chamber. You say humans are weak. You say they are small. You say they die quickly. All of this is true. And yet, Directive 7742 exists. Do you think we created this law for no reason? Korvan shifted uncomfortably. Elder Thessa, I meant no disrespect. I simply do not understand. No, Thessa agreed. You do not understand. Because you have never seen what humans can do when they go to war. She paused and looked around the chamber. I have seen it. I was there. I watched the fall of the Vorathi Empire. The silence in the chamber became heavier. The Vorathi Empire had been one of the most powerful civilizations in galactic history. It had ruled over 2,000 star systems for 10,000 years. And then, in less than 1 year, it had collapsed. The official records said it was due to internal problems, but the official records were lies. 47 years ago, Thessa began. The Vorathi were fighting a war against the Drenari swarm. The swarm was a species of bioorganic creatures that consumed entire planets. They were like locusts, but each one was the size of a building. The Vorathi were losing badly. Their fleets were destroyed. Their colonies were eaten. They were desperate. Thessa walked slowly to the center of the chamber, where a holographic display flickered to life. It showed a star map of Vorathi space. In their desperation, the Vorathi did something foolish. They hired humans. Not an army. Not a fleet. Just one small ship with 12 humans on board. The Vorathi thought they were buying cheap soldiers, cannon fodder, something to distract the enemy while the real Vorathi forces escaped. The hologram changed to show a small ship. It was battered and old. clearly held together by repairs and hope. This ship was called the Defiant Star. Its captain was a human named Johann. The Vorathi gave him outdated weapons and sent him to a mining colony called Kellis 9. They expected him to die. Korvan leaned forward in his seat. Despite himself, he was interested. What happened? He asked. Thessa turned to look at him. Her dark eyes were filled with something that might have been fear. What happened, young Korvan, is that the humans refused to die. And in refusing to die, they changed everything. The hologram showed the Drenari swarm arriving at Kellis 9. Millions of organic ships filled the screen, blocking out the stars. The Vorathi fleet retreated. Their commander said the colony was lost. Every tactical computer, every military expert, every prediction said that nothing could be done. The humans should have run. Any sensible species would have run. Thessa paused. But humans are not sensible. They are something else entirely. Something we do not have a word for in any of our languages. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many delegates as she could. I will tell you what Captain Johann and his crew did that day, and when I am finished, you will understand why Directive 7742 must never be violated. You will understand why the Galactic Council fears a species of small, short-lived creatures from an unremarkable planet, and perhaps, if you are wise, you will learn the lesson that the Vorathi learned too late. Thessa sat back down. The chamber remained silent. Every delegate was waiting to hear what came next. Let me tell you about the humans, Thessa said. Let me tell you about the day they turned a certain defeat into an impossible victory. Let me tell you about the price they paid, and the price everyone else paid because of them. The hologram flickered, and the story began. The message arrived at midnight. Ship time. Captain Johann was sitting alone in the cockpit of the Defiant Star, drinking cold coffee and looking at the stars. He was a tall man with tired eyes and gray hair at his temples. He had been a soldier once, then a traitor, and now he was something in between. A mercenary, some people called him. He preferred the term problem solver. The message was from the Vorathi Empire. Johann had worked with aliens before, but never with the Vorathi. They were a proud species. Reptilian. Cold-blooded in more ways than one. They did not usually ask for help from outsiders, but the message was clear. The Vorathi were losing a war. Badly. They needed fighters, and they were willing to pay more money than Johann had ever seen in his life. Johann read the message 3 times. Then he called his crew to the common room. There were 11 of them, not counting Johann himself. 12 humans in total, living on a ship that was too old and too small. But they were family. In their own strange way, they had fought together, bled together, and survived together for almost 10 years. Lieutenant Suji was the first to arrive. She was the tactical officer, a small woman with short black hair and eyes that noticed everything. She never raised her voice, never panicked, never made a mistake. The crew called her ice behind her back, but they meant it with respect. Sergeant Minho came next. He was the opposite of Suji, large, loud, and covered in cybernetic enhancements. His left arm was made of metal, and his right eye glowed faintly red. He was the best ground fighter Johann had ever seen, but he was also the kindest. He sent half his pay to his younger sister on Earth every month. Dr. Nari walked in quietly and sat in the corner. She was the ship's medic, a woman who spoke softly and smiled rarely. She had been a surgeon on one of the colony worlds before something happened that made her leave. She never talked about it. No one asked. Finally, Engineer Tejo stumbled in, still half asleep. He was young, barely 25, with messy hair and grease on his clothes. He kept the Defiant Star running through pure stubbornness and creative solutions. Other engineers said the ship should have fallen apart years ago. Tejo just laughed and said the ship was too stupid to know it was broken. The rest of the crew filtered in slowly. Pilots, mechanics, communications officers. All of them looked at Johann with curious eyes. "We have a job offer," Johann said. He projected the Vorathi message onto the wall. The Vorathi Empire is being attacked by something called the Drenari Swarm, bioorganic creatures. They eat planets. The Vorathi are losing, and they want us to help? Minho laughed. 12 humans against a swarm that eats planets? They are offering 10 million galactic credits, Johann said calmly. The room went silent. 10 million? Tejo repeated. That is enough to buy a new ship. A fleet of new ships. It is enough to retire, Suji said quietly. All of us. Forever, Johann nodded. The Vorathi are desperate. They are not hiring us to win the war. They are hiring us to be a distraction. They expect us to die while their main forces escape. Then why would we take this job? Nari asked from her corner. Johann smiled. It was a dangerous smile, the kind he got before doing something stupid and brave. Because they are underestimating us, he said. Everyone always underestimates humans. And that is our greatest advantage. The crew exchanged looks. They had heard this speech before. Johann had a habit of taking impossible jobs and somehow making them possible. It had almost gotten them killed many times, but it had also made them rich. And more importantly, it had made them legends. I am not going to order anyone to come, Johann continued. This is volunteer only. If you want to stay behind, I understand, but I am going to Kellis 9. I am going to fight the swarm. And I am going to make the Vorathi regret thinking we were expendable. One by one, the crew members stood up. Not one of them stayed seated. Well then, Minho said, cracking his metal knuckles. Let us go teach some aliens why you do not mess with humans. 3 weeks later, the Defiant Star arrived at Kellis 9. It was a mining colony on a barren moon. Surrounded by asteroid fields, the Vorathi had a small fleet defending it, but everyone knew it would not be enough. The Vorathi commander was named Keseth. He was a tall reptile with green scales and yellow eyes. He looked at Johann and his crew with obvious contempt. You are the human mercenaries? Keseth asked. His voice was cold. I expected more of you. Quality over quantity, Johann replied cheerfully. Where do you want us? Keseth pointed to a small outpost on the edge of the colony. There. You will guard the eastern mining tunnels. When the swarm arrives, try to hold them for as long as possible. It will give us time to evacuate the important personnel. Johann looked at the outpost. It was a death trap. No cover, no support, no hope of survival. Understood, he said with a smile. Keseth seemed confused by the smile. He did not understand humans. None of the Vorathi did. They thought they were hiring stupid, desperate creatures who would die for money. They were wrong. That night, Johann gathered his crew in the outpost. Suji had already analyzed the terrain and the enemy's likely attack patterns. Tejo was modifying their weapons with parts stolen from a Vorathi supply depot. Minho was doing push-ups in the corner, preparing his body for the fight ahead. Nari was organizing medical supplies, her face calm and focused. The Vorathi expect us to die here, Johann said. They gave us bad weapons, a bad position, and no support. They think we are fools. He looked at each of his crew members. Let us show them what happens when you underestimate humanity. We are not going to hold this position. We are not going to play defense. When that swarm arrives, we are going straight for their heart. Suji raised an eyebrow. Captain, that is a suicide mission. Maybe, Johann admitted. But dying on our feet is better than dying on our knees. And if we are going to die, we are going to take as many of those things with us as possible. Minho stood up and grinned. Now that is a plan I can get behind. Outside, the stars were disappearing one by one. The swarm was coming. And 12 humans were about to do something that the entire galaxy would never forget. The Drenari swarm arrived at dawn. There was no sun on Kellis 9, just the cold light of distant stars. But the crew of the Defiant Star called it dawn anyway. Humans needed routines. It helped them stay sane. Suji saw them first on the sensors. Her face did not change, but her voice was tighter than usual when she spoke. Captain, I am reading approximately 2 million hostile contacts. They are blocking out the entire eastern sky. 2 million. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Johann walked to the observation window and looked up. The swarm was visible now. A moving darkness that swallowed the stars. Each creature was the size of a small building. With wings made of organic metal and mouths filled with acid, they moved together like a single living thing. controlled by a hive mind somewhere in the center of the formation. The Vorathi fleet opened fire. Thousands of weapons lit up the sky, and for a moment, it looked like they might have a chance. Swarm creatures died by the hundreds, falling from the sky like burning rain, but for every one that died, 10 more took its place. The swarm did not slow down. It did not hesitate. It simply kept coming. The Vorathi flagship is taking heavy damage, Suji reported. Commander Kesath is ordering a full retreat. Johann watched as the Vorathi ships began to turn away. They were abandoning the colony, abandoning the civilians who had not yet escaped, abandoning his crew. Cowards, Minho growled. He was checking his weapons for the 10th time, his metal fingers moving with mechanical precision. No, Johann said quietly. They are just doing what makes sense. Staying here is suicide. The logical thing to do is run. And what are we going to do, Captain? Nari asked. She was standing by the door, her medical kit over her shoulder. Johann turned to face his crew. All 11 of them were watching him, waiting. They trusted him with their lives. They had always trusted him. We are going to do something illogical, he said. Teho, how fast can the Defiant Star go if we remove all the safety limits? Teho blinked. Captain, if we remove the safety limits, the engines might explode. Might? Probably. 60% chance. Johann nodded. Good enough. Do it. And reroute all power from life support and shields to weapons and engines. We will freeze to death in 20 minutes, Suji pointed out. Then we have 20 minutes to win this battle. Johann smiled his dangerous smile. Everyone to the ship. We are going hunting. 5 minutes later, the Defiant Star lifted off from the outpost. It was a small ship, barely visible against the massive Vorathi cruisers that were fleeing in the distance. The swarm ignored it at first. What threat could one tiny ship pose? That was their first mistake. Suji had spent 3 weeks studying the Drenari swarm. She had read every report, analyzed every battle, watched every piece of footage she could find. And she had discovered something that the Vorathi had missed. The swarm was controlled by a hive brain. A massive creature at the center of the formation that coordinated all the others. Without the hive brain, the individual creatures would lose their coordination. They would attack randomly, even turning on each other. The problem was that the hive brain was protected by millions of swarm creatures. No fleet had ever gotten close enough to attack it, but Suji had calculated a path. A narrow gap in the formation, created by the way the creatures moved. It would only be open for 30 seconds, and to reach it, they would have to fly faster than any ship had ever flown before. Course plotted, Suji said. Her voice was calm, as if she was ordering dinner instead of planning a suicide run. Opening in 2 minutes. All weapons loaded, Minho reported from the gunnery station. I have got enough explosives to crack a moon. Engines at maximum, Teho said. His voice was less calm. And I mean maximum. We are going to leave a trail of fire behind us. Johann gripped the controls. His hands were steady. His heart was not. Everyone hold on, he said. This is going to hurt. He pushed the engines to full power. The Defiant Star shot forward like a bullet from a gun. The force pushed everyone back into their seats. Warning lights flashed across every screen. The hull groaned under the pressure. They hit the swarm formation at impossible speed. Creatures tried to intercept them, but they were too fast. Acid sprayed against the hull, burning through metal. But they did not slow down. Organic missiles exploded around them. But Suji had predicted every attack pattern. 30 seconds to target, Suji called out. A massive creature slammed into their side. The ship spun wildly. Nari was thrown from her seat, but Minho caught her with his metal arm. 20 seconds. The temperature inside the ship was dropping rapidly. Frost was forming on the windows. Johann could see his breath. 10 seconds. The hive brain came into view. It was enormous. A pulsing mass of organic tissue the size of a small city. It had hundreds of eyes, and all of them were looking at the tiny human ship that had somehow reached it. Fire everything, Johann ordered. Minho pressed every trigger at once. Missiles. Plasma rounds. Explosive charges. Everything the Defiant Star had was launched at the hive brain in a single devastating attack. The creature screamed. The sound was not just noise. It was a psychic wave that hit every being in the system. Humans felt it as a splitting headache. The swarm creatures felt it as the death of their god. But the hive brain was not dead yet. Wounded, burning, but still alive. We did not kill it, Suji said. For the first time, there was fear in her voice. Johann looked at the hive brain, then at his damaged ship. The engines were failing. They had seconds before the swarm recovered and tore them apart. Minho stood up. His face was calm. "Captain," he said, "I can fix this, but I need to do it manually." Everyone knew what he meant. The reactor core. If someone stayed behind and overloaded it inside the hive brain's body, the explosion would finish the job. But that person would die. "Minho, no," Nari said. "Someone has to," Minho replied. He was already walking toward the reactor room. "And I am the only one strong enough to do it in time." Johann grabbed his arm. "There has to be another way." Minho smiled. It was a kind smile, the same smile he always had. "Captain, my whole life, people looked at me and saw a weapon, a soldier, a tool for killing. But today, I get to be something else. I get to be the person who saved everyone." He paused. "Tell my sister I love her. Tell her I died doing something that mattered." Before Johann could respond, Minho pulled free and ran toward the reactor. The escape pods launched 30 seconds later. Johann, Suji, Nari, Teho, and the rest of the crew watched from the small windows as the Defiant Star, with Minho still aboard, flew directly into the heart of the wounded hive brain. The explosion lit up the entire system. For a moment, there was a second sun in the sky, and then there was silence. The swarm was not destroyed, but without the hive brain, it was broken. Millions of creatures turned on each other, confused and angry. They scattered across the system, easy targets for the remaining Vorathi ships. In one impossible attack, 12 humans had done what an entire empire could not. They had won. 3 months passed after the Battle of Kellis 9. The Drenary swarm was scattered and broken, hunted down piece by Vorathi patrols. The Empire had won its war. But something else was happening, something the Vorathi Emperor had not expected. The humans had become heroes, not to the Vorathi government, of course. The government wanted to forget that humans had saved them. They wanted to bury the story, pretend it never happened. But stories are hard to bury, especially when thousands of soldiers witnessed them. The tale of the Defiant Star spread across the Empire like fire. Miners told it in the tunnels. Soldiers whispered it in their barracks. Children acted it out in the streets. 12 humans had done what 10,000 Vorathi could not. One human had sacrificed his life to save an entire system, and the common people began to ask questions. If humans could be so brave, so powerful, so willing to die for strangers, why did the Vorathi always run? Why did the nobles hide in their palaces while workers died in the mines? Why did an empire of trillions need to hire 12 outsiders to save them? The questions turned into anger. The anger turned into protests. And the protests turned into revolution. Captain Johann watched it all happen from a small apartment on the Vorathi throne world. He and his surviving crew had been brought there as honored guests. But they all knew they were really prisoners. The Emperor wanted to keep them close, where he could control them. Suji stood by the window, looking out at the massive city below. Smoke was rising from several districts. The protests were getting worse every day. "We should leave," she said. "This is not our fight. Can we leave?" Nari asked. She was sitting on a couch, reading medical journals on her tablet. "The Emperor has guards watching us at all times. I could get us out," Teho said. He was lying on the floor, staring at the ceiling. He had barely spoken since Minho's death. They all missed Minho, but Teho had been closest to him. "I have been studying their security systems. They are not as good as they think." Johann was silent. He was standing in the corner, holding a glass of water and thinking. He had been thinking a lot lately. About Minho. About the battle. About what came next. "We could leave," he finally said. "But should we?" The others looked at him with confusion. "Captain?" Suji asked. "The Vorathi people are suffering," Johann said slowly. "Their government is corrupt. Their emperor treats them like property, and now, because of what we did, they are starting to believe things can change. He paused. If we leave now, the emperor will crush the revolution. Everything will go back to the way it was. Minho's sacrifice will mean nothing. What are you suggesting? Nari asked carefully. Johann smiled. It was his dangerous smile again. I am suggesting that we finish what we started. Over the next 2 months, the crew of the Defiant Star worked in secret. Suji used her tactical skills to help the revolution plan their movements. She taught them how to organize, how to communicate without being caught, how to strike where the government was weakest. Nari made friends among the palace servants. She treated their illnesses, listened to their complaints, and slowly built a network of loyal informants inside the emperor's own home. Teho hacked into the Varathi military networks. He did not destroy anything. He was more subtle than that. He planted data bombs, little programs that would activate at the right moment and expose every secret the government had tried to hide. And Johann talked. He met with revolution leaders in hidden rooms. He spoke to crowds in underground gatherings. He told them about Earth, about human history, about all the times ordinary people had risen up against tyrants and won. Humans are not special, he told them. We are small and weak and we die easily. But we have learned one thing that your government does not want you to know. Power does not come from above. Power comes from below. An emperor is only an emperor because people agree to follow him. The moment they stop agreeing, he is just one person against billions. The revolution grew stronger every day. Finally, the emperor summoned Johann to his palace. The throne room was enormous, filled with gold and jewels and guards in shining armor. The emperor sat on a chair made of living crystal, looking down at the human with cold yellow eyes. Captain Johann, the emperor said. His voice echoed through the chamber. You have caused me a great deal of trouble. Johann bowed politely. I do not know what you mean, Your Majesty. Do not play games with me, human. The emperor leaned forward. I know you have been helping the rebels. My spies have told me everything. You have betrayed my hospitality. With respect, Your Majesty, you never gave me hospitality. You kept me prisoner while pretending I was a guest. There is a difference. The emperor's eyes narrowed. I am offering you a choice. Take 10 million credits and leave my empire tonight. Go back to your little planet and never return. If you refuse, I will have you and your entire crew executed for treason. Johann pretended to think about it. He scratched his chin and looked at the ceiling. Then he smiled. That is a generous offer, Your Majesty. But I am afraid I have to refuse. Then you choose death. No, Johann said. I choose something else. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Across the palace, Teho's data bombs activated. Every screen, every display, every communication device suddenly showed the same thing. Evidence of the emperor's crimes. Stolen money, secret prisons, murdered opponents, lies and corruption going back centuries. At the same time, the palace servants opened the gates. Nari had spent 2 months earning their trust. And now they were using it. Millions of protesters flooded into the palace grounds, chanting and demanding change. The emperor screamed for his guards, but they did not move. Suji had already spoken to their commanders. She had shown them the evidence of how the emperor had sacrificed their soldiers to protect his own wealth. The guards were no longer loyal. You cannot do this, the emperor hissed. I am the ruler of 2,000 star systems. I am a god among my people. No, Johann said quietly. You are just one person, and your people have stopped agreeing to follow you. The emperor abdicated that night. He was given a choice: exile or trial. He chose exile, and a ship carried him away to the edge of the galaxy, where he would spend the rest of his life alone. The Varathi Republic was declared 1 month later. The people elected their own leaders for the first time in 10,000 years. It was messy and chaotic, and sometimes violent, but it was also free. Johann and his crew finally left the Varathi homeworld 6 months after the revolution. They were not heroes anymore. They were too dangerous to be heroes. The new government thanked them politely and asked them never to return. Johann understood. He had seen it before. Humans were useful in a crisis, but they were uncomfortable to have around afterwards. They reminded people of what was possible. and that made powerful beings nervous. "Where do we go now?" Tejo asked as their new ship lifted off. It was smaller than the Defiant Star, but it was theirs. Johann looked at the stars ahead. "Wherever we are needed," he said. "There is always someone who needs help, and there is always someone who underestimates humans." Somewhere, in the quiet of space, a message arrived on their communication system. Another empire, another war, another desperate plea for help. Johann smiled and set a course. The galaxy had not learned its lesson yet. But it would. The Grand Chamber was silent when Elder Thessa finished her story. 100,000 delegates sat in their seats without moving, without speaking, without even breathing. The weight of what they had heard pressed down on them like a physical force. Young Korvan of the Mirathi Federation was no longer smiling. His blue feathers had gone pale, and his hands were shaking slightly. He had asked why the Galactic Council feared humans. Now he understood. That was 47 years ago. Thessa continued. Her ancient voice filled every corner of the chamber. In the time since then, do you know what has happened? Do you know how many species have ignored Directive 7742 and involved humans in their conflicts? She gestured, and a holographic display appeared above the center of the chamber. It showed a map of the galaxy, with thousands of points of light marked in red. 17 species, Thessa said. 17 different civilizations made the same mistake as the Vorathi. They thought they were hiring mercenaries. They thought they were using a primitive species as a tool, and every single one of them was transformed. The display changed, showing images of different worlds, cities rising from ruins, new governments replacing old empires, revolutions sweeping across star systems. The Vorathi Empire became the Vorathi Republic. The Kelmari Dominion was dissolved. The Zenthari monarchy was replaced by a democratic council, the Drenith Collective, the Visari Union, the Pelthek Empire. Thessa shook her head slowly. All of them are gone, changed beyond recognition. Ambassador Velric stepped forward. His crystalline body was still cracked with stress. "Some might say these are good changes," he said carefully. "Many of these governments were corrupt or oppressive. Perhaps the humans did the galaxy a favor." Thessa turned her dark eyes toward him. "Perhaps. But that is not for us to decide, is it? The Vorathi did not invite humans to overthrow their government. They invited them to fight a war. The humans made their own choice about what came next." She walked slowly across the floor, her thin body casting a long shadow. "That is what makes humans dangerous. Not their strength, not their weapons, not their technology. It is their unpredictability. When you invite a human into your conflict, you do not know what they will do. You cannot control them. You cannot predict them. They see the universe differently than we do." A delegate from the Tisari Collective raised a tentacle. "With respect, Elder Thessa, all species are unpredictable to some degree. We cannot read minds. We cannot know what any individual will do." "True," Thessa agreed. "But most species have limits. They have fears. They have calculations. They know when a situation is hopeless, and they act accordingly. Humans do not." She paused. "Humans have a quality that we struggle to translate into our languages. In their own tongue, they call it many things. Courage, stubbornness, defiance. But the closest translation is simply this: they refuse." The chamber was confused. Velric tilted his crystalline head. "They refuse? Refuse what?" "Everything," Thessa said. "They refuse to accept defeat. They refuse to surrender. They refuse to believe that anything is impossible. When every calculation says they should run, they attack. When every prediction says they should die, they survive. When every empire says they should obey, they rebel." She gestured at the star map again. Human space was growing. What had once been a single small planet was now a significant portion of the galaxy. In 300 years, humanity has gone from one world to hundreds. Not through conquest. They have no great fleets, no massive armies. They expand because other species keep asking for their help, and every time humans help, they leave behind a piece of themselves. Ideas, beliefs, The conviction that things can change. Corvin finally found his voice again. Then what should we do? Should we destroy them? Should we isolate them? Should we prevent them from leaving their territory? Thessa actually laughed. It was a dry, ancient sound, like wind through dead leaves. Destroy them? Young one, we could not destroy humanity, even if we wanted to. They are too spread out, too embedded in too many civilizations. Isolate them, they would find a way through any barrier we built. They always find a way. She shook her head. No. The only thing we can do is what Directive 7742 says. We do not involve them in our conflicts. We do not give them a reason to pay attention to us. We let them live their short, strange lives in peace, and we hope they extend us the same courtesy. The vote was called an hour later. Every delegate in the chamber voted to reaffirm Directive 7742. The 3 species that had violated it were censured and ordered to pay reparations to the civilizations that had been affected. As the delegates filed out of the Grand Chamber, Corvan approached Elder Thessa. He looked younger than before. Somehow. Smaller. Elder Thessa, he said quietly. I have one more question. The human captain, Johan, and his crew, what happened to them after the Vorathi Republic was formed? Thessa was silent for a long moment. Then she reached into her robes and pulled out a small device. It projected a holographic image of a battered trading station on the edge of known space. Captain Johan is dead, she said. He lived for another 30 years after the Vorathi Revolution. He helped 7 more species, started 4 more rebellions, and trained thousands of fighters before he finally died of old age. His lieutenant, Suji, became an advisor to the new Vorathi government. She helped them build a military that served the people instead of controlling them. Dr. Nari opened a hospital on a frontier colony. She trained doctors from 100 different species. And the engineer? Teho? Thessa smiled slightly. Teho disappeared. Some say he started a secret organization that helps oppressed peoples across the galaxy. Some say he is still out there, somewhere, causing trouble for tyrants. She paused. But there is one more person you should know about. The image changed to show the inside of a small bar. An elderly human woman stood behind the counter, pouring drinks for alien travelers. She had gray hair and kind eyes, and above the counter hung a faded photograph of 12 humans in mismatched armor. Her name is Hana, Thessa said softly. She is the sister of the soldier who sacrificed himself at Kellis 9. She runs a bar now. Travelers come from across the galaxy to meet her, to hear her stories about her brother and his friends. She has never fought in a battle. She has never started a revolution. But in her own way, she keeps their memory alive. Corvin stared at the image. She must be very old now. She is. Humans do not live long. But she has spent her whole life making sure that people remember what 12 ordinary humans did when an empire told them to die. The hologram faded. Thessa put the device back into her robes. That is what humans are, young one, she said. They are ordinary creatures who refuse to accept ordinary limitations. They are fragile beings who do not know how to break. They are short-lived. Yet their actions echo through centuries. She placed a thin hand on Corvin's shoulder. Remember that, and pray that you never have to learn it the way the Vorathi did. She walked away, leaving Corvan alone in the empty chamber. Far away, on a dusty trading station at the edge of the galaxy, Hana closed her bar for the night. She looked up at the photograph of her brother and smiled. Good night, Minho, she whispered. Sleep well. Outside, the stars were bright and endless. Somewhere out there, a young species was making its first journey into space. Somewhere else, an empire was starting to crumble. And somewhere, inevitably, someone was about to make the mistake of underestimating humanity. They always did, and humanity was always ready.